right, so first we'll be hearing from our presenters from the Rock Creek Review. I'll hand over.
Okay, thank you.
We'll do questions at the end of both presentations at the end of the session. So if people have questions, hold them until after our second presenters.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for coming this morning. I just want to take a few minutes, kind of set up how the Rock Creek Review came into being and the process we follow, passing off information from one set of editors to another. And then I want to let Cecilia and Maddisen take the rest of the time talking about their experience. Cecilia Groth is the managing editor this year. She took over after being one of the editors in last year's edition. And then Maddisen is one of the current editors this year and will be managing editor next year. So we'll talk about that process of passing information from one person to another and how that has been successful for us so far. But the Rock Creek Review started as one of my students' senior projects in the 2021 school year. She was interested in publishing, interested in kind of academic journals, and she wanted to do a project on it. So we worked together. She did research. She interviewed people who were both publishers and editors of literary research journals and magazines from around the country. She was mainly interested in student-run magazines, and she was mainly interested in online publications because we had a budget of exactly $0 to publish a journal. So we wanted to keep things inexpensive, something that we could continue without a budget. And then if we could get donors to donate later, we would develop a budget later and try to get things printed as a print journal. But she also applied to the Library of Congress for our ISSN number, and she developed the timeline based on her interviews with people that she talked to during her process. I think she talked to people from 12 or 13 different, both professional and student-run journals. And then she and I worked together to kind of tweak the timeline she put together. And then she kind of developed a logo that you'll see on the next screen. And Danielle and I didn't publish a journal that year. She just put together the process, and then we looked for an editor who would publish the following year, that was the following year, our cover. During the COVID pandemic, you can tell that was reflected in our cover art. But this was our logo from our logo design contest, which I still think is fantastic. But I want to click through here. Hopefully this will work. It worked. So this is the timeline that Danielle put together, and it has changed relatively little. And our initial plan was for this timeline to be passed from one editor to another and to eventually be filled out and expanded and turned into a process manual that would kind of be an exchange of knowledge from one managing editor to another as it went through. But as it turned out, this seemed to be enough information, just this list of deadlines and the student editors' meetings with me to get information about what needs to be done for these deadlines seemed to be working. And so we didn't want to fix anything that wasn't broken, so we kept this process. And different editors have needed different levels of kind of oversight. Some editors came with me and met with me every week. Some editors just had this list and didn't meet with me at all. And I panic and contact them and they're like, no, I'm good. I got this. So it's been kind of an adventure every year to figure out how different student editors are going to handle this. But we've got it divided up between the 2 semesters. Fall semester is pretty light. It's basically developing a call for papers and a cover design and getting information out to the contacts at universities and selecting an editorial staff for the spring. Spring semester is when we start receiving submissions from around the country, sometimes around the world, and then the editing starts and the putting together of the journal starts. So this is less than 2 pages. It's a 1.5-page document that, trying to close this, that we have been passing off from one student to another. And from my perspective as the advisor, it seems to be working pretty well. Haven't had any student editors say that this is not working, and I always tell them to let me know if anything is wrong. So I want to pass off the microphone to Cecilia Groth. Let her introduce herself and talk about your experience with this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm a junior at Heidelberg University. I'm actually majoring in environmental science and English, so being here was really interesting. Last year's managing editor for the Rock Creek Review sent me like a message and was like, "Hey, do you want to like be an editor for this?" And I was like, "This sounds fun. Of course, absolutely." And then at the end of that year, she sent me another message and asked if I would like to be the managing editor. And I had no clue what that would have entailed. So I was like, "Hey, can you let me know more about what like I would be responsible for?" And I basically got a document like that. And I was like, "Okay, I think I can do this." And then the fall semester came around and I was like, "What am I doing? What am I doing?" And I had a meeting with Dr. Devine and I got that document you saw earlier, the timeline, and we just like went through it. And I was like, okay, okay. I filled out my own dates. So like the schedule would be very customizable and I could pick when. And I ended up asking so many questions after that as well. I felt like I asked so many questions, it was annoying. I'm sure you wouldn't say that, but I would say that about myself. And that was so helpful because genuinely I had pretty much no clue what I was doing. There's another magazine Heidelberg has on campus, the Morpheus Literary Magazine for Heidelberg students only, creative works. And I was an editor for that. So I was like, okay, but like academic work was very new to me. And I have to say the hardest part about this year was the submissions. It is, it was a struggle this year, especially. Last year when I was just doing editing work, there were 18 or so, I think, submissions. Um, so there was like a plethora. There was so many, but this year it was a challenge. At the end of the original deadline, I had a grand total of 4 submissions, and I emailed Barry like, "What do I do? I don't know what to do." And we had to extend the deadline like twice and practically beg. So very much, if you're working with a small team, a small area, it'd be flexible. That was the biggest thing. We had a theme, as you can see on the screen, and I ended up having to be like, they don't have to fit the theme, they don't have to fit the theme, just like just submit them, please. And we ended up having 6. One author messed up the deadline and ended up submitting her paper like 2 months late. And I was desperate, so I'm like, sure, I have time to edit this, I can do that. And another one, because we had to extend the deadline so much, was like, I had written it with this first deadline in mind. And there's a lot of errors in it and I'm not really proud of it. Can I like retract it? And I ended up having to email him and find a way to say, please don't do that without saying that. And so it's like, you can edit the paper and like, we'll edit that one and we can publish that one that you're proud of. And that ended up being ended up working for him. So very much be flexible. Like getting submissions, you have good years, you have bad years. This is a bad year. Be so flexible. And I'm going to hand it off to my one and only editor, Maddisen Mikkelsen.
Yeah. Sorry, Maddisen, I want to add one thing. Talking about the getting submissions and the struggle for getting submissions. Our first year, we ran into the same problem. I think we had at our first deadline, I think we had 2 submissions. And I think the problem we kept running into was people's thinking that their submissions had to stick to the theme, even though our CFP said your submission doesn't have to stick to the theme. So every year we kind of toy around with the idea of not having a theme. And I think I was mentioning this to Maddisen that next year we might consider not having a theme at all as we go into it. So the theme has been an issue since day one.
All right, so my name is Maddisen. As I said, I came on as an editor this semester. And when I had originally said yes, I had no clue what I was getting into. I was like, oh, I'm just like going to go in and fix commas and do all that. And that was not what it was at all. It was like figuring out word choices and understanding that it was more of a service role and that you're working with somebody as a collaborator and not just fixing what you might think is a mistake. So that was like a really big learning curve for me. It was just like a whole shifting question on how do we help get the piece like where it's trying to go and what the author's trying to say, which was really, really fun to like learn and work with. As she said, like we originally had like 4 submissions. And so as I was going through, I like read through the first time and I was like, okay, there's not really any mistakes in here. I think it's great. And then I like paused and I read through again. And I said, what is the author saying? And that was a really big thing, just learning how to go through that. And it was really interesting to see. And it was a lot of what is like, what truth, like what are we going through right now? Because a lot of the authors were speaking to what the world is like for them today, which was very, very interesting. And that was a really big viewpoint for me of what are they experiencing? What are they seeing that I'm not experiencing? So I really did enjoy that. It's just been a really interesting experience. As I said, like they got the timeline. I really had not actually seen the timeline until probably like this week. It was just something where I was told, okay, you have to edit these, just have it done by this day. And so I was like, okay. And so I just went and I did it around my schoolwork. So I'd do like one on a weekend and then I'd wait a couple weeks and then I'd do another one. And I just like fit it in between my assignments for class, not necessarily like thinking about any specific timeline. So it was really interesting to like go in and see the timeline and be like, okay, this is what this would have been. This is when I would have done this one instead of just like making sure they were all done by the date. So yeah.
And I think a lot of the main reasons, I'll skip to the last slide here, a lot of the main reasons that Danielle wanted to take on this project to begin with back in 2021 was to give students the exact experience that Maddisen and Cecilia are having right now, is the kind of diving in deeply to other people's work critically, learning how to edit, learning how to go through that editorial process and turn that into a publication. Because that was something that she was really interested in and interested in pursuing in graduate studies. Her future plans ended up changing, but that was of deep interest to her. So she wanted to set up a process that other students could take part in and learn those skills. And something that could be passed on from one person to another. And so when I learned about this conference last year from a colleague, I immediately looked into it. I immediately found out that I wanted to bring my students here because we've just kind of been rolling with this process of handing down this the simple timeline because it seems to be working. So I'm really interested to find out what we can learn from what other journals are doing, how we can improve our process. Do we need to expand our process into a process manual? And find out if there are other best practices that we can adopt. So I'm actually looking really forward to the next speakers on this panel because that best practices seems to be what they're talking about. But I think that is up.
Morning, everybody. We are the GW Journal of Ethics and Publishing, and today we are going to be talking about building SOPs for a student journal. Like many student-led publications, we've had to think very seriously about continuity, structure, and how to keep important knowledge from disappearing every time leadership changes. What we want to share today is not just what an SOP is, but how it can help a student journal function more clearly, consistently, and sustainably. To kick things off, we want to start by introducing the team that's represented here today. We are bringing different perspectives from all across the journal, including management, editorial, content, marketing, and e-publishing. This cross-functional view is important because SOPs do not just belong to one person or one committee. They work best when they reflect how the whole journal actually operates. So we'll start with Cecilia.
Hello, I am the second Cecilia, who's managing editor, and I have been with the GWJEP since last fall.
And I'm Gwendolyn Harrison. I am the editorial committee lead for the GW Journal of Ethics in Publishing. I also started last fall, and I will be graduating from this program this spring as well.
There it is. I'm Alexus Fall. I'm the content committee lead, and I have been with GWJP since fall of 2024. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jessicah Jensen. I am the marketing lead, and I have been with the journal since fall of last year, and I graduate this spring, which is crazy to say.
Hi, my name is Kimiko Hammari. I'm the e-publishing lead. I have also been with the journal since fall of 2024, and I'm also graduating in the spring.
So let's start by getting to the heart of the problem, the high turnover that student journals experience. Student journals often operate within short academic timelines and, in our case at GW, within a 2-year graduate program. So that means that turnover is constantly happening. And when we have short turnover, then that means that we also have limited time to develop long-term systems. However, if that process is overlooked, then the knowledge can easily be lost between cohorts. So we're in this weird position of trying to get everything documented in only 2 years. Without documentation, which is what we've encountered in the past, we noticed that the same problems kept getting solved over and over by different people. Our workflows became inconsistent, the expectations were unclear, and each team ended up basically rebuilding processes from scratch. So that kind of restart culture essentially wasted time, it drained energy, and it made it much harder for us to grow. Once we identified this issue, we decided that SOPs were a way to interrupt that cycle, and we began to build documentation of our institutional knowledge so that we could pass that on to the next leadership team and allow further growth for the GWJP.
Okay, so what do we mean by SOP? An SOP is a standard operating procedure. It's not a rigid rule book or an intimidating binder that nobody wants to open, but rather it's a centralized, accessible guide that documents recurring workflows step by step. It offers clarity and continuity and is a living document that will evolve with the journal. In our case, SOPs have included timelines, expectations, templates, and scripts, all in a form that can evolve, like I just mentioned, and a good SOP gives structure where structure is needed while still leaving room for judgment, growth, and adaptation. Especially in student organizations, this balance is important. So next slide, please. SOPs matter because they reduce confusion before confusion becomes disruption. For us, SOPs have helped us to create clearer expectations for volunteers, reduce design fatigue, improve consistency in author communications, strengthen sustainability across cohorts, and increase leadership confidence. The last point is especially important with leadership because when leaders inherit new roles, they shouldn't have to decide what looks good and just have to go off the knowledge that they already have. They need to go off of what the journal has already been established as doing. And so they should have tools that help them with context and direction. They need a good starting point, and SOPs do that. And SOPs do not replace leadership, but they make leadership more manageable.
Okay, so when we decided to build SOPs, we didn't start by trying to document everything all at once. That would have been very cumbersome and maybe led to more burnout. So instead, we started by looking honestly at where our main issues kept occurring. Some of our biggest pain points included rewriting emails from scratch due to a lack of templates, navigating unclear editorial and publication workflows, finding ways to handle volunteer inactivity or inconsistency with volunteers, and smoothing out inconsistent submission and revision guidelines. While some of these may sound like small operational issues, together they created a real problem, especially for our growth. They slowed down our communication, they made our experiences less consistent, both for contributors and for our team members, and they placed unnecessary pressure on leadership, as I mentioned before, to rebuild the wheel. So once we identified those recurring points of issue, it became much easier for us to see what we needed to start documenting first.
One of the first major areas we focused on was the editorial workflow. This included building out processes for submission solicitation, submission intake and logging, peer review timelines and reviewer communication, structuring revision feedback, tracking the stages of each manuscript, as well as keeping an updated checklist on items so that we met our publication date every time. The last part mattered to us the most because a workflow isn't just about internal efficiency, it shapes the contributor's experience. If authors receive inconsistent or vague guidance and unclear expectations, the process can start to feel a bit difficult and oftentimes discouraging. A strong editorial SOP helps make the process more transparent, supportive, and equitable for everyone. Once that workflow is documented, it becomes easier to train new editors, maintain consistency, and spot areas for improvement over time.
I just want to mention everything that Gwen just listed are all individual SOPs. And so we, again, weren't starting with one major document. We were breaking it down into the processes that we needed to really outline first and foremost. And then we slowly worked on it over the past year.
So another key area for us was the content workflow. So while editorial SOPs focused on submission, guidelines, publication processes, and review, content focused more on how to move ideas from planning to production. For us, that included content calendar deadlines, topic approval and assignment tracking, content type guidelines, review and revision, and how we would hand those things off to editorial and marketing. This mattered because content is one of those things that can easily become informal in a student-run environment because we all have multiple things to do and different things to juggle, such as possibly full-time jobs, schoolwork, and also wanting to have an efficient journal. So content also sits in the middle of planning, cross-committee collaboration, and contributor collaboration. SOPs helped us define each stage and create a clean process.
So once we began documenting the editorial side, we realized that it became clear that for sustainability, we did not want to stop there. We also needed to create some clarity and continuing work applied and approach on our marketing and social media. That meant building SOPs around planning timelines for marketing campaigns, establishing visual branding and consistency, and then also scheduling posts and developing a message strategy, and also ensuring that we are tackling and reporting our analytics correctly. These are some kinds of things that can easily become informal and become honestly lost in everything if it's not documented. I noticed when I joined the journal, there was a lack of consistency, which created a lot of people just didn't know really who we were. And so our main goal was to hit hard on that consistency, and the marketing systems matter because of the visibility and ensuring that the content doesn't get overlooked and the promotion's consistent. It becomes very unclear and no one pretty much knows who we are. And creating SOPs in this area helps us ensure that outreach is not dependent on one person. Memory, style, or availability. It also allows future teams to build on what we've worked on instead of starting from scratch at each semester. And honestly, that has helped immensely in many ways.
And another set of SOPs that we found were essential for building out is how to manage volunteers and our teams. So as I mentioned, in student, and I believe Alexus mentioned as well, in student-run organizations, people are often balancing so many things, including coursework, jobs, internships, families, and everything else that life throws our ways. So we found that having clear expectations of our volunteers was especially important. Some things that our team management SOPs focus on include a clear onboarding process so that when people join, we're able to walk them through the process and really get them situated and give them all the permissions they need immediately. We included role descriptions and accountability standards so that everyone knew what was expected of them. We also outlined communication expectations for our emails, for our Discord, which we use for more quick communications and the like. And we also had to outline how to address inactivity professionally and fairly. None of these SOPs are really about being punitive. It's really just about protecting team morale. If everyone knows what's expected of them, then everyone is able to show up to those roles and really put their best foot forward. And so by developing these, we were able to make our organization more reliable. And yeah, it also allowed us to just operate with more trust and less confusion. So again, everyone was able to show up and really put their best foot forward. And, we're all working towards the same goals, knowing what we really needed to do.
So how we built our SOPs, our process included identifying recurrent friction, mapping out a workflow that already exists, and then also creating modules and assigning ownership to those and planning to revise those annually. The modular approach is a great way to approach things because it doesn't require creating one massive document. It allows you to split things up piece by piece, so no one person becomes overwhelmed with creating those processes. And in this approach, we actually were able to grow the amount of content that we were able to produce within the journal this year because it didn't feel as overwhelming to everyone involved because they were just looking at a mass of different things. And one of the most important things that we did learn is written right on the screen here, and it is perfection is not required to begin. And I think that is so important because if the environment is perfect, that's whenever things stop being documented because people think everything's just flowing okay. And when you stop documenting, that leaves ground for things to fall apart.
So we want to make sure that our SOPs were sustainable, and creating the SOPs is one of the things that keep them useful for one another. And to make SOPs sustainable, we focused on centralizing the storage and shared access to them, and then the version tracking, and also building a review timeline for each cohort, and then treating SOP review as a leadership responsibility. The documentation only helped if people can actually find it, trust that it's current, and understand who is responsible for maintaining it. As SOPs should not be a forgotten file, it should be a living resource that new leaders inherit, review, and improve over time. The long-term mindset helps turn SOPs from a one-time project into part of the journal's culture.
So as we near the end, I just want to share our big takeaways from our experience creating SOPs for our journal. First and foremost, I think what we've reiterated throughout this whole process or presentation is that it's important to start small, but start intentionally. You don't have to document everything and every process all at once. You can start with one core workflow and build out from there. So I hope that you take away, one, start with a core workflow, build templates that help to reduce the decision fatigue for repetitive tasks such as emails, meeting agendas, and project tracking. Document decisions in real time while they're still fresh and you can remember all the nuts and bolts. You don't want to have to think back to months before and you forget certain areas of the process. We also recommend that you view SOPs as empowerment tools, not bureaucratic obstacles. Again, this is to help reduce decision fatigue, help to build trust with your team, and just to help support your leadership and your growth. So it's not anything bad or cumbersome. It really is an empowerment tool. And most importantly, invest in systems now, especially if your journal or your press is small, so that future leaders are not forced to keep reinventing the wheel, especially as there are many more, SOPs to document. If you're able to start small and then just build that process for others to follow in those footsteps, then it really does, help out in the long run. So for student journals, especially where there is this turnover, that investment makes a major difference. And strong systems will create continuity, reduce burnout, and help organizations spend less time scrambling and more time actually growing.
We want to say thank you. We hope this presentation offers a practical starting point for anyone thinking about how to strengthen process within their student journal or another student-led publication. If you would like to stay connected, you can follow us on LinkedIn, and you can also find us on Instagram at GWPubs. We thank you guys for coming, and you can also scan the QR code for the template for our SOPs. Also, if you guys have any questions, all three of us plus the two virtual are always happy to answer questions. You can also always message us on LinkedIn or Instagram if you have questions as well. We're on that page nonstop, and I'm constantly blowing your guys' social medias up. So if you want to know more about us, I'm always happy to talk to you guys. And so is the rest of our team if you have any questions about specific committees. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all our panelists from this session. We have some time now to take questions from the audience in person and in Zoom. If you're on Zoom, if you could use the Q&A feature so we can track questions that are coming in, and we can pass the microphone over to our previous panelists if there are any questions for them.
I just want to say great presentations to both journals. I actually have questions for both presentations. The first one is for the Rock Creek Review. So one of the things you guys mentioned was finding it difficult to get submissions, which we've also struggled with in the past for our journal. And I was just curious, what methods of outreach do you employ to kind of reach your audience and like get authors for your journal? This is hot. The CFP, the call for papers. We have like an emailing list that each managing editor is encouraged to add like 5 or 6 universities to a year. I think it's extensive by now. That's the main way. And then when I struggled getting submissions this year, I also tried starting an Instagram page that did not gain much traction. But I mean, it was new, so maybe it'll hop off for Maddisen, hopefully. Just a lot of like trying basically everything. I also know, Dr. Devine, you posted a lot on your social medias too. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's very much just the luck of the draw. A different question. So for the SOPs, I think that's a great idea to implement. Something that I think we will be considering for the future as well. My question was, how do you use the SOPs as, like, it's supposed to be a guideline, but then for incoming leadership, how do you still make sure you give them enough like creativity to take with their journal while still establishing the guidelines?
I can start by answering this. I mean, I never felt that there was a lack of ability to be creative. We all feel, I'm going to speak for all of us, we all feel very creative and welcome to constantly improving the process and seeing what does and doesn't work and what worked last year and what didn't and what stuck. And so I never felt there was a lack of having to follow an SOP or a certain process that was left for me from the team before. It was more of just a resource of, okay, this is what they did. What can we do to improve it? But that's just me speaking for marketing. I know that's very different from editorial and like the content team. I don't know if either of you guys want to add, but that's how I felt from the marketing side.
Yeah, definitely. When I started on the journal back in the fall, we kind of were in a transitional phase. And so fortunately, we kind of had a bit more flexibility to sort of experiment with different email templates and different processes. And I think through that kind of process for us, it was able, or we were able to, see what worked, see what didn't work, and still constantly come up with new ideas. So I think even when we have these SOPs in place, there's still plenty of room for us to experiment and decide if things can be improved. So I think we all just decided as a team to do that for each and every one of our committees. I don't know, Alexus, if you have anything else you want to add to that.
So similarly to Gwen, my committee, we had a lot of wiggle room. Whenever I became content lead, there were only 2 standard processes that we had. So it gave me a lot of room to create those SOPs. And I look at SOPs as a not as necessarily a rigid guideline. When you have an SOP, it's a starting point. So whenever anyone comes in, it's easier for them to see how things were done in the past. So there's plenty of room for creativity. So you have a set group, oh, they did this last year. I can see why this didn't work. I can see why this didn't work. And this is where I'll go from this. Instead of having to start everything from your own mind, it gives you a way to create, I guess, more easier. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to add one more thing. I will say communication is absolutely key. If you're not communicating with your other committees and your fellow committee members within your own committee, it's not going to work. I also am constantly asking, because I mean, this is my first time in this position, so my first time in a role like this, and I was constantly asking my marketing committee of what was working for them. How is it working for them? I know they also have a life. I know they also have work or other obligations. And so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't only working for the committee leads, but I also wanted to make sure that it was working for them because they also have to do assignments and have work and have all these things. And so we can't only consider what's working for the journal and what's working for the leads. We have to consider what's working for everyone involved.
We have a few questions from online. So Shannon Kelly says, thank you for the presentation, and asks, where do you keep the SOPs? Do they live in Google Docs, in Google Drive, Blackboard, or another platform? Where do you keep those so they're easily accessible?
The SOPs are inside a Google Drive. Currently, that's where we house them.
There's a follow-up question. Someone in the audience has asked if they're publicly available.
They're private, but the SOP template that we shared on the QR code is available for you all to utilize and build out on your own.
Hi, this is Dr. Planky. I'm the publisher at Georgetown Medical Review. I appreciate the fact that your SOPs are private, although I think that you've done all this work, and being a leader in this, I would really like you to reconsider making them publicly available, or at least licensed to journals that may want to use them. The template, I tried to get it from the QR code, but it wouldn't activate. Is it possible, how big is the template, and is it possible that you could review it for us or put up the QR code again?
John, is it possible if I send you the link, could you send it to share it with participants?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. Thank
And
you. We'll
we
share
could
it
also, if you want, we could also post it on the conference website as well.
Yeah.
We have a resources page, which I haven't filled out yet, but we'll add a bunch of resources that come up during the conference.
I did, yeah. Okay, thanks, guys. My name is Jacqueline Hatch. I'm a student in the publishing program, a staff, and I'll be adjuncting a School of Education class in the fall. My question is, can you talk a little bit about the nexus of AI in this work? I feel like especially for the ethics journal, I'm like, where does that fit into the SOP specifically with directions on all of your volunteer authors? How are you tracking that? How are you editing that? And it's so hard to detect. I don't even know if there is an answer for you guys, but just a little bit about where that is situated in all of this. And same for the Rock Creek Park Journal.
So I won't speak for all of the committees, but I know for the editorial committee specifically, are you asking about, are we monitoring if authors are using AI when they're writing, or more about like our internal process and us using AI?
Either or, I think both. If you guys want to talk about it from the SOP standpoint, that's probably more of what you're well versed in, but also I think you have to have like a little bit of a standard there when you are taking in these call for papers and find some kind of way to just make sure that trust is still very much intact with any volunteer authors.
Absolutely. So our team is currently not using any kind of AI tools to actually do like our editing work, or our like the content committee is not using AI to create any of that work ourselves. Like that is all, we have a very human first approach to all of that. When it comes to authors using AI at the moment, I'm not sure if we have like a written standard for that of like this is or isn't allowed, or you know what we will tolerate in terms of AI. But at the moment we have a very human first approach to everything from our end, and also that is our expectation of authors.
I will say on the SOP standpoint, marketing right now doesn't use any AI. I encourage our team to use like their creative thinking and as much as possible. And to my knowledge, we haven't used it. But I am going to be a shameless plug here. We did have a roundtable earlier this year where we talked about AI and how it's being used in a few different ways, and that is posted on our YouTube. And Cecilia and then Claire, one of our other journal members, did a pretty lengthy conversation about that, which was hosted by the content team. And so it is linked on our social media that you can watch, and they go pretty in depth on like their standpoint, which does reflect how we review it and see it within our own journal. So
I appreciate that question. It gives us more to think about and review for our author guidelines to update it with current, trends happening with AI.
I did just want to add very quickly, we just published our spring issue of the journal, but in our fall issue, we had an excellent piece that was submitted by, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her name. We had an author submit a really wonderful piece called AI as a Creative. And it was a really wonderful study about how we intersect AI with creativity, and kind of how we should be very cautious with using AI in creative spaces. And we consider the journal to be a professional environment and also a creative space for authors, marketing, all of that stuff. So I highly encourage people to check out that article as well. That's on our website and in the fall issue of the journal as well.
From the perspective of there we go. From the perspective of the Rock Creek Review, we are an undergraduate publication that's run by undergraduates for undergraduate work. The great majority of our submissions comes from students who have submitted papers to their literature professors, who then their literature professors say, hey, this was a good paper, you should submit it to this process. So we kind of have a built-in screening process from the professors that are out there suggesting that they turn their papers in. So I don't know about this year, but in previous years, we have not had any problem with any suspected AI written papers. But the goal of the Rock Creek Review is, literary criticism and interpretation, which is, a very kind of human process. So I don't think we have looked into establishing any sort of AI policy, but that does bring up a good point. We should probably put that in our call for papers, some sort of limits on the use of AI. So that was a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another question from online. How would you approach handling pushback by volunteers against rules or processes established in an SOP or otherwise in your guidelines?
I will answer this one. This was actually the first year I think we ran into a situation that we didn't know how to handle. Just due to us building SOPs, there was sometimes a lack of guideline, just because we were figuring it out as we went. And so it definitely was a learning process and just figuring out how to communicate and communicate several ways instead of just one way, because everyone communicates differently. And just giving people grace, but also understanding that the work still needs to be done and it is a volunteer position, but you are agreeing to that volunteer position. So it did take a lot of learning, at least from my experience. I know Cecilia and I together had a big learning curve of just being in a leadership position and like learning how to handle certain situations like that and building an SOP around it.
Being mindful of time, I just want to chime in super quick. In terms of volunteer expectations and leader expectations, I think that we have those outlined at the beginning of the semester. Some we did have to build as we went in the past year, but because those are outlined, we do have that level of trust in everyone who volunteers with the GWJEP sort of knows what's expected of them, and so there's not too much pushback in that area because we are very upfront and transparent in the beginning. And in terms of the individual committee work SOPs, as the in-person team mentioned earlier, it's very flexible. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's guidance of how things have been done in the past, and how you can continue to build off of that framework. And so there hasn't, again, leadership has been very flexible of like seeing how our members react to the SOPs and how they want to contribute to them. So luckily we haven't had a ton of pushback, but we will be now that we have this full index built out, we'll be rolling it out in the fall and see how, the new team, as we onboard new members, really reacts to it.
I think this question is probably mainly for Alexus, but anybody can tackle this. So as everybody was going through their process and all the different SOPs, it sounded like this was both kind of a new thing for the journal and kind of a well-oiled machine. So how long have you guys been working on establishing these SOPs, and kind of how much effort over time have you guys put into this?
How long have we been working on establishing these SOPs? Not very long. I believe we started in fall of last year, so August. So since August of 2025, that's how long. That's when we began working on this. When Cecilia came in, Cecilia proposed the idea of creating these SOPs. I had a few already just because I wanted to produce more content that semester, and I felt like it would be more helpful. Me also being a student and super busy, I thought having detailed guidelines on what we were supposed to do would help cut down on the questions that I might get from other people who are writing and contributing. So that's how it started for me. Cecilia, do you want to jump in? Because I know that this was you spearheaded this.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Our previous managing editor, Hend, I believe, introduced the idea, but it was towards the end of her sort of leadership experience. And so it was something that she passed on to me of wanting to just standardize more of our processes and, have more institutional knowledge. And so that's when I built out the template, and I asked the leaders to start identifying the pain points in their committees so that we could build out this full index. So it has been less than a year, and we as of like 2 days ago, finally finished out our full library of SOPs, covering all of our different committees and everything that we do. And it'll continue to grow. I'm sure we have some blind spots that we'll identify next semester. But yeah, 1 year.
Amazing progress for 1 year.
Yes. I think we might have time for one more question, but I want us to be able to finish up so that the next group can get in place for their panel. Are there any other questions online or in the room?
Thanks. I'm Scott Challoner, Hampton University. I just wonder if I could throw a big one at you, and maybe this was just one that we can talk about throughout the day, but how do you guys think about what the work you do in relationship to your broader community, different other publications, campus culture, student body, faculty, other staff, other stakeholders, and then maybe even beyond the campus, just sort of radiating out?
It is a big question. I guess the short answer is we are 100% virtual. So the on-campus stuff, I would say it's pretty hard, especially because our program is a little bit smaller. We're in our little knit tight group. So, but I feel that in the past year, we have become a lot more vocal about the journal. Also, John has been very gracious about informing all of our professors about the journal and trying to incorporate our journal as much as possible in our coursework, such as like the business plans that were made for it and all the work that has been done to create the journal and that is still being done to keep it going. And so that has helped a ton of get visibility on it. And then also we incorporate a lot of staff interviews and industry interviews, which usually overlap a lot with the university. And so we try to find as many ways as possible to incorporate our university. And also, even with the marketing side, all of our stuff is very strategically branded. So if you do see it, you automatically, if you know George Washington, you know that we're part of them just because our branding is so specific. Still work in progress. It's going to take some time to become more well established, but people are noticing us a lot more. And we published the 2 biggest journals issues that we've had, or the journal has had so far, which I do think has helped a ton as we've been pushing out as much content and as big of journals as possible to get the word out there about our journal. If that answers your question in a small bit, I know that's a very loaded question.
Yes, thank you.
I think for the Rock Creek Review, we started with my student Danielle's mission of just trying to provide future students with publishing opportunities. So it started as a very internal thing, but I think the shift has, or the focus has shifted externally, where now I think we are more focused on providing publication opportunities in literary studies for undergraduates. Because I know there are not a ton of academic journals available for undergraduates in literary studies. I don't know, I've spent a lot of time talking to the faculty advisor from the Digital Literature Review published from Ball State University. And they've kind of taken us under their wing as kind of a younger sibling publication. And they help distribute our call for papers and we help distribute their call for papers. We kind of work together to provide undergraduate publication opportunities to get students interested in not only publishing their own work, but to get them interested in the publication process from both ends.
Just enough time. You're going to ask.
I want to ask both of you about getting, attracting is the actual word here, attracting students to submit papers. Is there for both of these journals an academic incentive vis-a-vis faculty members from programs from which your students submit papers so that they can get some academic credit for submitting papers?
For the Rock Creek Review, no, but that's a really interesting idea. I'm gonna note that down to find out if there's any way we can make that possible for students who submit papers. No, I love that idea as an incentive because submissions is kind of a constant problem. I think we've only had 1 year in our 6 years so far where we've had more publications than we knew what to do with. But providing some sort of incentive where students can get some sort of additional credit somehow towards something for submitting paper for publication is a fantastic idea. Thank you for that.
I could answer that from our perspective. So for students who are writing a paper, well, first of all, we have an ethics in publishing capstone course, and so many of the papers come out of that. And if a student wants to continue developing their paper, they can do it as an independent study to get credit. And students working in the journal as volunteers also have the option of doing independent study if they want for that. But we don't require it. And we do work it into a few of the courses, as I think Jessicah said.
I will say, I guess I'm a prime example of exactly what Sean said. I'm doing an independent study this summer with the journal. The spring issue we just came out with, my capstone was published in it. It's about true crime, about confidentiality and privacy. And then, yeah, I've done it throughout the entire 2 semesters. And so I did exactly that. I saw it in my last year classes and I have to do that. And so I applied and then I'm published and my independent study came out of it. So it has, I had a lot of incentive of just not only getting my work out there, but also being able to have on-hands experience. So I guess that is the incentive.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, and we'll get set up for our next discussion. Thanks.
Thank you all. And I just want to say how proud I am of all the work that you are all doing on the Journal of Ethics in Publishing. Fantastic work. So thanks, everybody.